Welcome. My name is Nikki Underwood, and I'm a Georgia's Pre-K Quality Support Specialist working with the Georgia Pre-K program in the Department of Early Care and Learning. I'd like to welcome you to today's session focusing on the topic of letter learning in Georgia Pre-K and how you plan appropriate letter knowledge instruction in the Georgia's Pre-K classroom. Before we get into the topic of letter learning, I would like to point out that this is a companion or follow-up piece to the Phonological Awareness Pathway to Literacy video series. If you have not watched those videos or participated in the phonological awareness session, I strongly encourage you to stop and go back and watch those videos prior to diving into letter learning, because the phonological awareness session will be referenced frequently throughout today's presentation. But thank you for joining me today as we talk about letters everywhere in Georgia's pre-K. Our objectives today are to plan appropriate letter learning instruction for the Georgia's pre-K classroom, and we're going to do that by looking at the GELDS and WSO indicators and unpacking the ones specifically related to alphabet knowledge. So the GELDS CLL 7.4a says that with prompting and support, children will recognize and name some upper and lowercase letters of the alphabet. The WSO indicator under the language and literacy strand says that children will begin to develop knowledge of letters. So as a pre-K teacher, your job is to help children begin to develop knowledge of letters by recognizing and naming some of the upper and lowercase letters of the alphabet. Well, let's start by talking about what is letter knowledge. Letter knowledge is children's knowledge of letter names and shapes, the formations of the letters. What do they look like? Basically, it's their ability to recognize and name most or all letters of the alphabet. Now, the standard we just looked at said some letters of the alphabet, and the WSO indicator says begins to develop knowledge of letters. So keep that in mind. You don't need to have every child proficient on all 26 upper and lowercase letters of the alphabet. That is a very good goal to have for each child, but the realistic expectation is for pre-K children to be able to recognize and name some or most of the letters of the alphabet before going to kindergarten. Why is letter knowledge important? Well, letter knowledge is an early predictor of reading success. It goes along hand in hand with phonological awareness. They're not the same skills, but they do work together as early predictors for reading success. Learning letter names will help children later on learn letter sounds. And letter knowledge also helps children develop their understanding of the alphabetic principle. And the alphabetic principle and letter knowledge are both related skills, but they are not the same skill. So we're going to talk about what the difference is between letter knowledge and alphabetic principle. Again, letter knowledge is just children's ability to recognize and name most or all letters of the alphabet. This letter knowledge does not include the ability to apply letter sound relationships. Letter knowledge is just the ability to recognize and name most or all letters of the alphabet. Alphabetic principle is the understanding of the relationships between sounds and letters, and that letters and letter patterns represent the sounds of spoken language. And so phonics instruction will help children learn and use the alphabetic principle. So developing letter knowledge skills alongside phonological awareness skills will help prepare children for phonics instruction and an understanding of the alphabetic principle. So letter knowledge skills must be developed throughout the pre-K day. Phonological awareness skills must be developed through that phonological awareness a time segment in your day using the continuum described in the video series. And developing these skills alongside one another in tandem will prepare children for phonics instruction in kindergarten and a strong understanding of the alphabetic principle. So children will be ready for phonics instruction and alphabet principle instruction when they can recognize and name a number of letters of the alphabet and have strong phonological and phonemic awareness skills. They need both of those skills to be strong in order to be successful in phonics instruction. So pre-K teachers help prepare children for phonics instruction by introducing and strengthening their letter knowledge. Whenever you're planning letter learning activities in your classroom, we want to always make sure that they are developmentally appropriate for the children that you're working with. You have children in your classroom starting at the beginning of the year. They may be 3, they may be 4 years old, and by the end, some of your children may be 4 or 5 years old. So you want to make sure that your letter learning is developmentally appropriate for the 3 to 5-year-old age group. And what we know about young children is that they learn best through interactions and play. So have conversations about letters. Look for letters everywhere in your classroom, in your school. Talk about letters that you might see in the community, environmental print. Play games with letters. Use hands on materials, hands on experiences to get children working with letters and talking about letters. Because young children acquire alphabet knowledge or letter knowledge through frequent repetition and practice. We also know that to make letter learning developmentally appropriate, that letters should not be taught in isolation or in sequential order. And that is because children who learn letters in sequential order may have difficulties identifying letters out of order or applying letter knowledge in various contexts. Research shows us that when letters are consistently presented in alphabetical order, students exhibit an order effect with greater retention for the later letters at the beginning and end of the alphabet than for the letters in the middle of the alphabet. And why is that? Um, it 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 happens a lot with children. They can retain the beginning and the end, but the middle is sometimes fuzzy. This same concept of latching on to the beginning and the end happens in phonological awareness when you're helping children identify and isolate individual phonemes in a word. They might identify the beginning and the ending sound and struggle with that middle sound. It also applies in the context of reading comprehension. A lot of times, children can remember the beginning of the story or the end of the story, but the details in the middle of the story might be fuzzy. So, this is also a skill that you can work on with children, focusing on the middle of the word or the story, focusing on the middle of the alphabet to get children focusing in on details or on the individual letters of the alphabet that come in the middle. So letter learning should be developmentally appropriate in that we're also not going to do um, letter of the week. It is not a developmentally appropriate method of teaching letter knowledge. And this is because this format only allows for 1 week of instruction on each letter of the alphabet, reaching the end of the alphabet around March. And so there's very little time to circle back around, review the letters, and provide frequent exposure to all the letters, repetitive exposure to all the letters. So this is why we encourage you not to do a letter of the week format so that the children will be able to have multiple exposure opportunities and frequent practice with the letters. Because not all letters are created equal. Some letters are easier to learn, are used more often, and children will retain these letters quicker. Letters that are easier to learn include high utility letters that appear in lots of common words that appear in lots of words in the English language. These are your Wheel of Fortune letters. I think of R, S, T, L, N, E. Those are all high frequency or high utility letters in the English language. Also, think about letters whose sound is pronounced in the name of the letter. The letters that represent only one sound are much easier for children to learn. Some of these also say pronounce their own names, such as b, B. The sound is pronounced in the name b, 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 f, mm, P, T, L, N, R, and D all are letters that represent only one sound. So these letters are going to be a little bit easier for children to learn and latch onto. Other letters are more difficult to learn and are used less frequently in common words in the English language. They also may appear less frequently in children's names. Letters like Q, X, and Z appear less frequently in print and in children's names. Letters that represent more than one sound. For example, C represents the k sound as in cat, but it also represents the s sound as in circle. G represents the g sound as in go and the j sound as in giant. So these letters represent more than one sound and may be more difficult for children to master. Letters in the middle of the alphabet, as we previously stated, research shows that children learn those letters at the beginning and the end quicker, so they'll need more practice with the letters in the middle of the alphabet. And letter reversals are going to take extra practice for most children. So let's talk about letter reversals for just a minute. These are letters that look similar to one another in shape, but they are easy for children to reverse because up to this point, children have gained an understanding that an object is an object no matter which direction it is facing. So a chair is still a chair no matter whether you turn it around, flip it upside down, and it's still a chair no matter which direction it is facing. But now with letters, direction matters. So a B, when it's flipped around, is now a D. If you turn it upside down, it can be a P, or flip it around again and it's a Q. So we have to help children understand that direction now matters when we're talking about letters because children are very literal and they need to be aware of this understanding that the direction of the letter matters. So how do we help children develop their letter knowledge skills? Letter knowledge skills are developed in a few phases. So they were going to begin by naming the letters, then recognizing and distinguish the letters, and then they will be able to match upper and lowercase letters. So let's talk about how children unpack their letter knowledge or how we can unpack letters for children. We're going to start with talking about the letter names, as we've mentioned previously, before we move on to the letter shapes or the formations. And then finally, we will do some explicit instruction on the letter sounds because everything, all learning happens in a continuum. And you have to help children progress in their skills by building on the previous skill. So let's talk about letter names first. When children first come to you at the beginning of the school year, you really are not going to be able to control how much exposure they've had to language and the alphabet, story time with their families. You don't know what their home experiences have been with being exposed to academic and instructional topics. So you will have to make sure that you start the beginning of the year by helping children hear and recognize the names of the letters of the alphabet. Whenever you're singing the alphabet songs or reading alphabet books or using alphabet charts, you want to make sure that you are pointing with the pointer when talking about the letters. This will help children begin to see them and recognize them, but it will also help them build one-to-one correspondence of letters to letter names. For example, LMNOP is not a letter. It's not one single letter, it's several letters. So it is important to use your pointer to show that one-to-one correspondence. Also, the letter W. Pronouncing the letter W has more than one syllable. So you want to make sure that you're using that one-to-one correspondence, demonstrating with the pointer and pointing to the letters so that children can see that each one letter has one name. You can teach and practice this with songs, books, and alphabet charts. After you have introduced children to what the letters names are, you're going to help children begin to recognize what they look like. So you're going to start by helping children recognize the difference between letters, numbers, and symbols, and then start talking about what the letters actually look like. Describe the letters. Are they tall? Are they short? Do they have straight lines or curvy lines? And you can help teach and practice this with ABC puzzles, games and manipulatives, environmental print and name charts, and sensory exploration is going to be key in this phase of their letter learning, especially for children who are not visual learners but are kinesthetic learners. We want to try to reach children in multiple modalities with multiple methods and materials. So using manipulatives and having children practice creating letter formations and shaving cream, sand, and salt. Using Play-Doh and sandpaper letters, these are going to be crucial for some children to help them build their letter knowledge. And finally, once children have an understanding of the letter name and what it looks like, you will begin to help them understand that letters represent sounds. Letters are visual representations of spoken sounds. So you will help teach and practice this with books, listening and alliteration games, and modeled and shared writing, where you are sounding out the letters as you write them. You're talking about the letters as you write them. So you will introduce letter sounds to children once they begin to understand what the letter names are and what the letters look like. I do want to point out that letter knowledge is not a phonological awareness skill, although they work together to help a child read using different parts of the brain. They are not the same skill. So, as previously mentioned, letter knowledge and phonological awareness will be developed alongside one another to help prepare them for phonics instruction. The graphic on your screen that you're seeing now includes the phonological awareness continuum on the left-hand side of this pyramid. And the phonological awareness continuum is unpacked in that video series that we've previously mentioned. So if you need more information about that, I strongly encourage you to go watch those videos. There's a segment on each of the steps on the continuum. So you do see that continuum laid out on the left side of the pyramid. On the right side of the pyramid, you will see a sort of a continuum for letter knowledge laid out. So you see they start with letter names on the bottom, singing alphabet songs, reading alphabet books. You can also do listening games here to increase their letter knowledge. And then they're going to talk about letter shapes. They're going to start being exposed to what the letters look like, matching the shape to the letter name. Sensory exploration, again, is a big piece here. Environmental print, upper and lowercase matching. And then once children have been exposed to direct instruction on letter names and letter shapes, and they're starting to make some of those connections, you can introduce letter sounds. And the letter sound instruction will go along hand in hand with the phonological and phonemic awareness skills of onset rhyme and phonemes. You will not put letter sound instruction during phonological awareness time because remember, they're two different skills, but they will work together. And ideally, the goal is for children to develop their phonological awareness skills and their letter knowledge skills, reaching the point of understanding that letters represent sounds, and now they're ready for phonics instruction when they get to kindergarten. If you have any questions about this graphic, if you would like to ask me questions, my email address will be provided at the end of the video. So again, remember, letter knowledge is not a phonological awareness skill and should not be taught during phonological awareness time. But letter knowledge can be taught in many other times of the pre-K day. So when and how should I provide letter knowledge instruction? Developmentally appropriate letter instruction can happen throughout the pre-K day, and you will teach letter knowledge through games and interactive experiences, singing songs, reading ABC books, floor puzzles, bingo, student name charts, environmental print charts, alphabet manipulatives, letter stamps. Play-Doh is going to be a very beneficial activity for children to participate in practicing the formation of the letters and strengthening their fine motor skills. Painting at the art easel, when children are holding their hand upright and holding a paintbrush in their hand, they are using different muscles to strengthen their ability to write and do different fine and gross motor things, but they're also practicing the strokes needed for letter formation, straight lines and curvy lines. Sensory exploration, again, is mentioned here, so valuable to teach letter knowledge and letter formation. Shared reading and writing experiences where they can watch you model the formations of letters as you're talking about writing them. And the writing center during center time is a great place for children to practice their letter knowledge. So plan these opportunities throughout the day. In your lesson plans, in opening activity, you can play I Spy letter games, mystery letter, where you give clues about what a letter looks like and they guess the letter, writing name charts, and finding letters in the morning message. During story time, you can read alphabet books. There are a myriad of alphabet books available that you can read. Alphabet Soup, Elemento Peas, Chicka Chicka Boom Boom, multiple opportunities to bring that alphabet letter learning into story time and into music and movement. All you have to do is go to YouTube and type in alphabet songs for preschoolers, and you will find a plethora of options for children to participate in during music and movement. I will say that I see a lot of times teachers put alpha motion during music and movement, and there's nothing wrong with using alpha motion, but please don't use alpha motion exclusively as your only music and movement activity, just copied and pasted from day to day, because alpha motion is a good song, but it's quite lengthy to get through all 26 letters of the alphabet. It is repetitive. It can become a rote activity. Children can become disengaged if you do it every day. So if you are going to use alpha motion during music and movement, please make sure that you use it as an option, not the only thing you do during that time. Large group literacy activities can address letter learning skills through shared reading, looking for letters in big books and charts, shared writing, talking about the letters as you write. You can create names charts in large group literacy. You can write silly alliteration sentences in large group literacy. All these good ideas are good for bringing letter knowledge into that time of your day. Small group activities are where you're going to get the most bang for your buck for moving children in their progression of developing their letter knowledge skills, because this is a time when you can put children into smaller groups. You can do some hands-on activities with direct instruction with their name or with letter matching. You can also specifically identify letters that children need to work on and plan those activities intentionally. So this is a really good time to bring letter learning into your day. You can also take the letter learning into center time and independent activities. You have games and puzzles and manipulatives in your room that children can use to engage in these activities. Children can write the room or do letter scavenger hunts. There are writing and art center activities involving letters, either stamps or cutting letters out of magazines for different art projects. Again, sensory exploration is going to be so big and impactful for some of your students to help them retain their knowledge of the letter formations. Uppercase and lowercase matching games, the options are really endless for center time. You can even go outside and have children practice writing um, letters on the sidewalk using sidewalk chalk, or take big durable letters, either wooden letters or wooden blocks with letters on them, and hide them outside on the playground and let children find and identify them. Another activity idea is to hide magnetic letters or Unifix cubes inside Easter eggs and let children go on a letter Easter egg hunt and then talk about the letters that they found on the playground. So there's lots of ways you can bring letter learning into the entire day. So letter instruction, scope, and sequence. So let's talk about this for just a minute. Where do you start and then where do you go from there? So start by looking at the letters, talking about the letters and looking at them. Talk about what do they have, what do they look like? Do they have straight? Do they have curvy lines? Are they are they looking different than numbers and symbols? Are they tall? Are they short? Say the alphabet names and use one-to-one correspondence by pointing to the letters on your alphabet chart or on your alphabet line, so that children can get that one-to-one correspondence of each letter of the alphabet. Sing the alphabet song, sing lots of alphabet songs. Make it fun. So once you've talked about what they look like, you can begin with the letters and students' names using name charts. You can also use environmental print. And then talk about 2 to 3 letters at a time. If you remember, the research shows us that it's not necessarily developmentally appropriate to talk about letters in isolation. So talk about multiple letters at a time, and talk about the upper and the lowercase letters so that they can see what they look like and start making those connections. And you can talk about the letter sounds as you're introducing them, but please remember that the focus at first is to get them to name and identify what the letter looks like. So after you've talked about letters and students' names, and you've used environmental print, and you're starting to pick 2 to 3 letters at a time to focus on what comes next. Well, you want to intentionally pick the letters that you're going to start working with and unpacking for your children. You want to start with the easy letters, those high utility letters, letters that children can easily produce the sound of, and letters whose sound is pronounced in its name. And you also could start with letters that represent only one sound. These are the letters we talked about at the beginning. And intentionally select a couple letters and pull some activities based on those letters. You can get environmental print. You can use a name chart, all in the same all in the same area. Make those connections between the M in McDonald's and the M at the beginning of those names. Then you can pull out your letter manipulatives and activities to help the children begin making connections across the contexts of application with the letters. So I would like to point out that again, you want to be very intentional about the letters you pick to work on at the same time. You can see that here we have M for McDonald's, P for Pizza Hut, and D for Dairy Queen. These are very common places that children are hopefully familiar with. You may not want to pick a place or an environmental print that represents something children aren't familiar with. That's going to be harder for them to make connections. And I would also say that I chose P and D here, and we are looking at the capital with both the logo and the student names, but P and D are letter reversals. So I may want to pause and think about working with these letters at the same time. So just be very intentional with the letters that you're selecting to work with. And then once you've started tackling some of those easier letters, though high utility letters, letters and student names, you can move on to some of the more difficult letters. These are the letters that are less frequently used, letters in the middle of the alphabet, letters with sounds that may be difficult for children to produce. So I want you to think about what you're hearing during phonological awareness time with your children. Are you doing enough listening games, enough repeating and echo games that you can hear the sounds that children are producing? There are sounds that developmentally, sometimes children are delayed in mastering. For example, sometimes instead of the L sound, children might replace it with a W sound. So instead of I love you, I love you. Or same with the R sound. They might say, I'm having a really good time instead of a really good time. There also are substitutions. So instead of 3 years old, maybe they're 3 years old. They substitute the th for the f sound. So think about the sounds that are more difficult for children to produce. Think about the sounds that are difficult for children to produce with the way the muscles in the mouth form. So be very mindful about that when you're picking letters to work with. Q, qu, and X, x are often hard for children to produce. So you may want to introduce these letters without focusing on the letter sound at first. And once they can identify it, then you can go back and strengthen their knowledge of the letter sound. Letters that represent more than one sound, like C and G, are also going to be more difficult for children to master, and letter reversals are going to take lots of extra practice. Exposure, repetition, and practice are going to be the key to developing and strengthening children's letter knowledge. Talk about the letters in order, in alphabetical order. Talk about the letters out of order so that you can focus on different letters in different contexts, and look at the middle of the alphabet when you're talking about the letters. Sing songs, play games, and use manipulatives, because what we know about young children is that they're going to learn and retain letter knowledge if it's interactive, playful, and they can make meaningful connections with the letters. So find letters everywhere in their name, environmental print, and around the school. And talk about the relationship between the letter and the sound it represents. Because letters don't make sounds, letters represent sounds. A car makes a sound, a baby makes a sound, a cat makes a sound, but a letter is a visual representation of a sound. So we need to start thinking about the vocabulary we've used as children so that they can become aware of the relationships between letters and sounds. So when you start to think about introducing letter sounds, I want you to remember, again, it's about the relationships between the letters and the sounds that they represent. And I want you to consider a few things as you're introducing letter sounds to young children. Again, children must first be able to recognize, name, and distinguish letters in order to gain or acquire an understanding of the letter sounds. So it is going to be useful to you to introduce the letter sounds along with the letters, but understand that you need to strengthen their naming and recognition skills first before trying to strengthen their letter sound recognition and their letter sound understanding. Because if they don't have the name of the letter and the shape of the letter firmly secured in their brain, they're not going to have anything to attach the letter sound to. So it is important for you to strengthen those recognition and naming skills before moving on to letter sounds, before moving on to that direct instruction of the sound that the letter represents. When Again, and it might even be a good idea to talk about with your children that the letters represent sounds. They don't make sounds like other things do, but they represent sounds. Because sometimes one letter represents a sound, and sometimes two or three letters represent one sound. So you do want to start them on that understanding of the relationship between letters, letter patterns, and sounds. When you introduce the vowels and the vowel sound, focus on the short vowel sound first. Reason being is because these are very easily formed sounds, and they children can master those short vowel sounds very easily. And it might even be a good idea for you to avoid using the terms long and short vowels at first and just stick to the short vowel, because children are very literal. And so it's a very good possibility that children can hear a short vowel sound produced in a long way over a long period of time, and it's in his mind become a long sound. So if you said, give me a long vowel O, he might say ah and produce that short vowel sound in a long way. So avoid using those long and short terms at first. Remember that children are very literal, and that will come over time, that understanding of long and short. But for our purposes as pre-K teachers, we're going to start with short vowels before moving on to long, and we're going to try to avoid using those terms at first to get children truly understanding what long vowel sounds are, or short vowel sounds are, excuse me, short vowel sounds. But remember, whether you're working on letter sounds or letter recognition, letter knowledge should be developed alongside phonological awareness to prepare children for phonics instruction. Letter knowledge should not take the place of your daily phonological awareness instruction, because if these things are developed alongside one another in tandem, the end result would be children who are ready for instruction in phonics with a strong understanding of phonemic awareness and a strong understanding that letters represent sounds. They are now ready for phonics instruction to begin decoding very basic, simple words. So if you need activity ideas for your letter learning instruction in your classroom, you can always refer to the JELDS Teacher Toolbox cards. As we said at the beginning of the presentation, the alphabet knowledge indicator is CLL 7.4. So on the card CLL 7, card number 77, number 78, and 79, you will find activity ideas for large group, small group, and center time. All of these activities could be done as they're written, but they could certainly be adapted for different settings and contexts. They could probably even be adapted for virtual learning opportunities if that's something that your program is implementing. I encourage you to read alphabet books, Chicka Chicka Boom Boom, Eating the Alphabet, Elemento P's, Alpha Oops. There's so many alphabet books out there for you to use to bring that letter learning into story time and reinforce it in that way as well. Use what you have in your classroom to plan hands-on activities for children. You have letter unifix cubes, magnetic letters, letter puzzles. You can make name puzzles for your children. You can use letter stamps, letter bingo, shaving cream, sand, and salt for those sensory experiences, Play-Doh. Use what you have in your classroom to provide hands-on activities for your children, especially during independent time in centers and small group. Um, we don't want children relying on iPads and technology to interact with letters. You should be having them use their hands-on experiences and materials to gain that understanding and interact and play with letters. When using your program's curriculum as a planning resource, just make sure that all the activities you select and plan and document are appropriate for Georgia's pre-K, that they follow the continuum of learning that we've talked about in this session, and that they're not letter of the week, isolated letter instruction, or drill activities. Additional resources, all you have to do is go to Google and type in alphabet books for preschoolers, and you will find multiple alphabet book lists. I have one linked here on the slide that you will be able to get to if you click on the slides and this link. You can also go to Reading Rockets, which is a really cool website. You just type in Reading Rockets in your search bar and you'll get right to it. There's lots of research on all of the different elements of literacy. There's some really good information on letter learning, alphabet activities that you can plan for your classroom, and even thinking about the alphabetic principles. So there's just a few resources and ideas for you to grab onto if you need some more things for your instruction. I want to thank you for your attention today and for watching the video on letter learning. I hope that you have also had a chance to watch the video on phonological awareness and how those two pieces work together and don't replace one another, but they do work together to get children prepared for phonics instruction. If you have additional questions, you can reach out to me on at the email address you see on your screen. I look forward to hearing your questions, and I really appreciate you participating and watching the professional development series that are available here for you. Again, if you have questions, reach out to me. Thank you very much for your time and attention.